Boldwood presents A Lady's Lesson in Scandal, written by Darcy McGuire and read by Polly Edsel. The moral right of the author has been asserted. This performance is owned by Boldwood. Chapter 1. Millicent Whittenburg was in quite a pickle. First, the potted palm she hid behind was far too short and woefully bereft of foliage. Second, Viscount Tread, a man smelling of mouldy paper and dusty mothballs, and only 2 years younger than her father, doddered ever closer to her inadequate hiding spot. His watery blue eyes wildly searched the crush of lords and ladies for his betrothed. Third, and most troubling, Millie was his betrothed. Tonight's ball was in their honour, officially announcing an engagement arranged by her horrid stepmother. "Shall I make some kind of scene?" Millie's best friend, Ivy Cavendale, leaned close. "You can slip out the back. I'll meet you in the gardens." Her light floral scent reminded Millie of wild flowers after a spring rain. Ivy shifted in her icy blue satin gown, trying to shield Millie further from view with her body, which was laughable. Millie towered over her friend and was about 3 times Ivy in width. "It's no use. He'd smell me out like one of Father's pointers, and the last thing you need is more scandal." Millie smiled at her oldest friend. Poor Ivy had experienced her share of gossip when her father and brother died a few months prior under highly suspicious circumstances. Ivy became a social pariah overnight. Not that either of them enjoyed warming the walls of London's finest ballrooms, but it was still nice to receive invitations. Ivy didn't get those anymore. Ivy had become a recluse. Millie worried her friend might never recover from the double blow of grief and shame caused by her father's and brother's deaths. Ivy only agreed to attend the ball tonight because she knew Millie needed her support. Just the thought of lying beneath Viscount Tread as he wheezed and sweated was enough to make any girl gather her friends near and run to the closest nunnery. Millie swallowed down the rising bile. Things couldn't get any worse. "Oh, there you are, daughter!" Hellfire, things just got worse. As a matter of course, when her stepmother, Patricia Whittenburg, became involved, things always got worse. "I've been looking for you, dear. Poor Viscount Tread has been almost frantic with worry, thinking you might have slipped away." Patricia's stretched vowels made Millie cringe as the woman's perfectly painted eyebrows raised like a guillotine. Perhaps Millie could run. Patricia had no chance of catching her in the ridiculously heeled slippers she wore. Hope died swiftly as her stepmother wrapped bony fingers around Millie's arm. Sadly, the only thing escaping was Millie's chances to be free. Her stepmother wore a lime green monstrosity, cut so low Millie could almost see the woman's nipples. Patricia's waist was cinched tight enough to crack a rib. It was a wonder she could breathe at all, let alone brandish the commanding tone she directed at Millie. "Come out from behind that plant, you silly girl!" Patricia's mouth crimped in disdain as her nails dug into Millie's skin. "And you?" She narrowed her eyes at Ivy. "I distinctly remember not inviting you. The last thing we need at this ball is the stench of scandal." Ivy took a half-step back. Her thin shoulders drooped like a flower bereft of rain. Millie hated the defeat she saw in her friend. She came as a guest of the Duchess of Dorset. Not precisely true, but Patricia wouldn't dare question the Duchess. Lady Philippa Winterbourne, Duchess of Dorset, was widely known to have the ear and favour of Queen Victoria herself. One didn't disagree with the Duchess. Ever. Despite her stepmother's talons digging even deeper, Millie stifled a smug smile. This round went to Millie. "How the two of you won her approval, I'll never know." Patricia's grip hardened, making Millie wince. She could pull free, but that would only draw attention to them, and Viscount Tread bumbled ever closer. Patricia eyed Ivy like a worm in her apple. You may have snuck into this party on the arm of the Duchess, but she isn't here now. Get away from us, child. I have things to discuss with my daughter. Millie almost laughed aloud. Patricia was barely 6 months older than Millie, and 2 months older than Ivy. They'd all come out in the same season, for cripe's sake. Hearing her stepmother refer to Millie as her daughter, or Ivy as a child, was almost as ridiculous as being engaged to a man within squinting distance of 70. So not ridiculous at all, according to Patricia. Ivy's gaze bounced back and forth, from Millie to Patricia. Millie knew Ivy would never abandon her, but if she stayed, Patricia would become even more cruel. I'll be fine, Ivy. Why don't you get some food? Ivy wasn't eating nearly enough. She had always been slight, but after the loss of her brother and father, she was painfully thin. I shall be just over there if you need me. Ivy pointed to the refreshments table. Millie smiled. All will be well. Trust me. Ivy nodded, but she didn't look convinced. Smart woman. I'm not convinced either. As Ivy wove through the crowd, her dress winking like a jewel caught in moonlight, Patricia made a clicking sound in the back of her throat. How dare the Duchess bring that disgusting girl to my house? All the rumours say the child's father murdered her brother. The whole family is sick with madness. I'm sure of it. Once you're married to Viscount Tread, you won't be permitted to socialise with people like that. Mark my words, Millicent. Patricia wrenched Millie around and assessed her from the top of her wild red curls, struggling to escape their pins, down her cream evening gown, failing to contain her generous curves, to her flat slippers taking nothing away from her lamentable height. Sighing dramatically, Patricia shook her head, her grip loosening enough for Millie to shake off the offending hand. For the first and likely last time, you are the belle of this ball. Everyone has come tonight to celebrate you and your betrothal, to a viscount, nonetheless. You should be thrilled, and tripping over your huge feet with gratitude to me for arranging this match. Ungrateful wretch! Millie opened her mouth to protest, but Patricia kept talking. Finding a man willing to marry a ginger-haired girl who was too tall and too fat to ever be fashionable was no easy feat. Ouch. Even from her horrid stepmother, the words cut. Millie clenched her teeth and straightened her shoulders. I don't care what you think. Your words can't hurt me. But they did, and Patricia knew it. The pernicious woman tilted her head, candlelight sparkling in the amethysts threaded throughout her perfect blonde ringlets. Millie couldn't begin to fathom how Patricia thought the purple jewels would complement her hideous gown. Imagine where you would be without my help. An awkward, chubby spinster doomed to a life of solitude. I prefer solitude, especially when the present company is so tedious. Millie stuck out her chin and pressed her lips together. She knew Patricia would have slapped her for talking back, or at least tried, if they weren't in a crowded ballroom. But Millie savoured the safety of the crush tonight. Patricia stretched her lips into an ugly smile. Viscount Tread is old, smelly, and ruined to suffer from gout. He'll be perfect for you, dear daughter. Why are you so cruel, Patricia? Do you think it makes you powerful? Because it doesn't. It only highlights your weakness. Patricia grabbed Millie's arm again, tugging viciously, almost causing Millie to stumble. Remember your training. Widen your stance. Center your weight on the balls of your feet. Punch Patricia in the face. No, don't punch Patricia in her pointy little rat nose. She will bleed all over the carpet. Patricia spoke through clenched teeth. Come out of there this instant. Proper young ladies don't loiter behind the foliage. Millie did many things proper young ladies never dared. She blamed it on being raised at her father's side, a tomboy through and through. Millie rode horses astride. She threw knives with surprising accuracy. And, recently, she had been secretly training with the Duchess to become a private investigator. Lady Philippa Winterbourne was more than a filthy rich widow. She was fierce, formidable, fashion-forward, femme-fatale, and lots of other fabulous F-words. Everything Millie one day hoped to become. Under the Duchess's demanding tutelage, Millie was learning the tricks and trade of becoming a private investigator, a career offering her freedom. Not that her stepmother knew any of those things. The very idea would cause Patricia to swoon upon the chalked ballroom floor in a heap of sickly green silk. Millie twisted free of her stepmother's grip, surprising the woman with how easily she escaped. "I am not loitering, and I already told you, I will not marry Viscount Treadful." It was a nickname she and Ivy devised. She was quite proud of it. When she shared the moniker with Lady Philippa during her weekly visits for tea, which were actually training sessions, she could have sworn the Duchess almost cracked a smile. At the very least, the left corner of her lip had curled, and her eyes had sparkled. Millie was chuffed. It was quite a feat to get the indomitable Duchess to show any emotion at all. Patricia's lips hardened, and her eyes narrowed. "You will do as you're told, or your father will ship you off to care for his aging sister. Would you prefer that dismal future?" "I would prefer any future free from Viscount Treadful. He's almost as old as father. Not all of us are willing to go to the lengths you did to ensnare a wealthy man. There's a word for women like you, Patricia, and it certainly isn't mother." Millie threw back her shoulders and relished a rare moment where her 5'11" frame and fuller-than-fashionable figure put her at an advantage. She towered over her stepmother's delicate physique. But Patricia Whittenburg was as intelligent as she was mercenary. She could exert her power over Millie with no more physical strength than crooking a finger. Patricia had to tip her head back to meet her daughter's gaze. She batted her charcoal-darkened lashes. Everything about the woman was fake. Her beauty, her smile, her calculated kindness. She was a cruel, heartless monster wrapped in a package of perfect blonde ringlets, a tiny waist, and pert nose, and the devil's soul. "There's a word for women like you as well, dear. Women who refuse to marry. Women who prefer the company of other ladies to a man. It's unnatural." A thrill of alarm skated up Millie's spine. "I've no idea what you mean." Surely Patricia wouldn't be so bold as to accuse her of sexual deviance. "Sometimes I wonder exactly what you and the Duchess of Dorset do every week at your so-called salons." Patricia's green eyes sparked with an unholy fire. She had used the belladonna drops advertised in Mrs. S.D. Power's The Ugly Girl papers, and her pupils were so dilated the black almost encompassed her irises. "She certainly can't find your controversial skills that entertaining." Millie's heart thumped painfully at her stepmother's threat. While she was not a sapphic, she wasn't confident about Lady Philippa's proclivities. Not that it should matter. But Patricia could wreak havoc in the beau monde by merely hinting at homosexuality. Even someone as powerful as the Duchess might be brought low by such scandalous accusations. Millie owed Lady Philippa a great debt. Philippa wasn't just acquainted with Queen Victoria. She was the Queen's right-hand lady, hired to uncover villainy amongst the titled gentlemen, long protected by their brethren in the House of Lords. And she believed Millie would make an excellent addition to their team. Millie could still hardly believe it. Too tall, too chubby, too outspoken. But Philippa found her athletic, intelligent, and resourceful. She thought she was perfect for the job. She believed in Millie. Philippa had also promised to help Millie escape her betrothal to the ancient Viscount Treadful. a feat they intended to accomplish this very evening. Unless Patricia ruined everything with her devastating threats. She won't. I will not allow it. When faced with conflict, attack was preferable to defense. I hardly think you are stupid enough to offend someone as grand and powerful as the Duchess of Dorset, especially with such preposterous accusations. Millie raised her brows in a haughty expression she'd been practicing in her mirror. Let's see what the House of Lords thinks. Homosexuality is illegal last time I checked. Millie shook her head. What a ridiculous law. It shouldn't matter who someone is attracted to. Love is love, regardless of the body parts involved. Millie should have left the last part unsaid, but it was true. And she always spoke the truth, even when it made her life more difficult. It was a character flaw she tried and failed to correct. Spoken like a true invert. Patricia's lips twisted in disgust. If you refuse to marry the Viscount, I will have no recourse but to confess your perverseness to your father. A wicked woman engaged in immoral activity, with the Duchess of Dorset, no less. And you would turn your own daughter into the authorities. Patricia snorted. I won't have to. If the Star of Venus catches wind of the scandal, and I can assure you it will, the bobbies will come to us. Patricia was addicted to scandal sheets, gasping at the latest juicy piece of gossip while she sipped her morning cup of tea. The Star of Venus was by far the most appalling of the lot. They wouldn't hesitate to print such licentious tripe regardless of how baseless the accusation. Publications like The Star rarely troubled themselves with details like facts or truth, though Scotland Yard certainly should. Still, the prattle of small-minded people created untold horror. News of a duchess engaged in sexual perversion would spread through the beau monde like wildfire. Even if no legal ramifications occurred, Lady Philippa's reputation would be decimated. You are despicable. Millie narrowed her gaze and wished she could throw her ever-improving right hook at Patricia's powdered cheekbone. Patricia tisked, shaking her head. Really, dear? Your skin turns such an unsightly shade of red when you're in high temper. Calm yourself. Millie was ready to calm herself with a rousing game of crush Patricia's windpipe and watch her turn puce. Adjusting one of the curls bouncing near her chin, Patricia sighed. You know your father won't question me. You've already displayed your sexual depravity with Lord Franklin St. George. Now this. Does your immorality know no bounds? The blood drained from Millie's face. How did her horrid stepmother find out about Franklin St. George? That had been over 10 years ago. She was barely 7 and 10 when St. George courted her. Her father wouldn't have betrayed her trust so grievously. Patricia widened her carmine-stained lips, flashing a perfect row of blunt little teeth. Your father keeps no secrets from me, dear. He told me all about it, and the money it cost him to keep St. George quiet about your indiscretion. How do you suppose it will go over when I tell your dear devoted father about this new twist? He would never believe you. And once, that would have been true. But now the words tasted bitter in Millie's mouth. Test me, dear. I dare you. Patricia's green eyes flashed triumphantly. At the very least, we'll need to commit you to an asylum. Don't worry. You'll have your devoted Duchess to keep you company in your filthy cell. Millie's stomach twisted painfully. While accustomed to Patricia's spite, she could not allow the Duchess to be harmed. I won't be frightened. I have a plan. It will work. It must work. She and the Duchess of Dorset had put their heads together weeks ago and created a solution to escape her stepmother's maniacal grip. It wasn't ideal, but it might be her best chance for freedom. Millie only needed to be bold enough to carry it out. Tonight. Before she lost her nerve. Not even you would be so vicious, Patricia. Another lie. Her stepmother was cruelty in curls. Patricia's bell-like laughter rang out, mocking Millie. Silly girl! Of course I would. Why are you so hateful? Truly. Patricia's pretty mask slipped, and Millie glimpsed the terrifying creature beneath. You've been the light in your father's eye for far too long. I am his wife. His loyalty belongs to me, as does his title and his money. With you married off, when your father comes to his end, nothing will stand in my way. He has no heirs, no distant relatives waiting to inherit. I'll be taking a page out of your dear Duchess's notebook. Everything that was his will come to me, his poor, devoted widow. With Patricia's master plan laid out, Millie felt ill. Since the beastly woman married Lord Whittenburg, she had patiently and meticulously thrust a wedge between father and daughter. Insidious little lies, manipulations of truth, contrived scenes designed to place Millie in an unflattering light. And her father wasn't innocent in the horrid affair. He'd never been the same after her error with St. George, but since Patricia came into their house, things had gotten significantly worse. At every turn, he chose his young, nubile wife over his devoted daughter. The divide was now so deep, Millie's relationship with her father had fractured completely. Game, set, match, Patricia. Mark my words, Millicent. A madhouse is your future unless you marry the Viscount. I don't care how disgusting he is. I don't care how old. I don't care how perverted his proclivities. Given your own behaviours, you might actually enjoy it. Patricia's pointed little nose tilted toward the ceiling as she laughed again, a delicate, tinkling melody juxtaposing her venomous words. He's probably the only man here who won't care that you are no longer intact. No need to thank me. I just want what's best for my sweet girl. Anger roused Millie from the pain of betrayal. You will pay for this, Patricia. But it was an empty threat, and they both knew it. Before Patricia could respond, their gazes were drawn to the striking figure of Lady Philippa Winterbourne, the Duchess of Dorset, as she strode across the ballroom floor. A wave of relief washed over Millie. Reinforcements. Lady Winterbourne cut through dancing couples, sharp as a blade and without a hint of hesitation. She wore a blackberry gown dripping with crystals that caught the candlelight as she swept through the crush of people. Philippa was a dark star shining in a bright sky. Lords and ladies scrambled to get out of her way. The Duchess intercepted Viscount Tread as he turned slow circles, still scanning the crowd for Millie. His ruddy complexion darkened close to scarlet when he saw Philippa. He almost tripped over himself attempting a gallant bow. She gestured with her fan in the opposite direction of where Millie hid in the shadows. His bushy grey brows furrowed as he squinted at a young lady in the far corner, whose only resemblance to Millie was the cream colour of her dress. Relief washed over his face as he smiled wide at the poor girl and blundered off. Lady Winterbourne continued her graceful journey toward Millie and her stepmother. Patricia's lips hardened, and she lowered her voice to a harsh whisper. Viscount Tread is your future, Millicent. No one, not even the Duchess of Dorset, can save you from your fate. Accept it, or I will make sure you suffer beyond your worst imaginings. I'd rather accept a knife in my belly. Millie refused to be a pawn in Patricia's game. She would carve out her own future, one free of her malicious stepmother's stratagems. Tonight. It must happen tonight. As quickly as wiping clean a chalkboard, Patricia adopted a cheerful expression and turned toward the Duchess. Her voice was too loud, her smile too wide. Why had her father made such a horrific choice? Were men so blind? Their logic and loyalty turned by a pretty face, a small waist, a nice pair of eyes? It was horrific. A father should always fight for his children. But Lord Whittenburg deferred to Patricia at every turn. Millie grieved his loss as though he were dead, because the man she knew from childhood was gone. Men are inconstant, fickle fools. One more reason why she wanted nothing to do with them. Except tonight. A man will save me from the hell Patricia has planned.
Lady Winterbourne, you honour us with your presence.
Patricia's shrill voice cut through the musicians playing a lively waltz. Millie looked over her stepmother's head at the Duchess of Dorset and reminded herself she was far more powerful than Patricia would ever know, even if her stepmother seemed to hold Millie's future in her sharpened claws. Lady Philippa Winterbourne's beauty was fierce rather than delicate, a jaw almost too square, lips stained only a few shades lighter than the deep purple of her gown, hair blacker than sin and just as luscious, boldly streaked with silver and piled high in an intricate coiffure. She was a visual force, and everything Patricia Whittenburg would never be in both poise and power. Millie watched her stepmother's eyes narrow with envy. Lady Philippa lifted a perfectly arched brow. It's lucky you are so pretty, Lady Whittenburg, as your personality leaves much to be desired. At least your face will recommend you for a few more years, though I would limit your consumption of wine. It dulls the wits and complexion. Two things you can't afford to lose any more of, wouldn't you agree? Patricia's mouth fell open. Air rushed out in a strangled squeak. Pardon? She hastily deposited the empty wineglass she was holding into the potted palm. Pay attention, please. I do not repeat myself. I came to speak with Miss Millicent. Excuse us. She nodded at Millie and turned to walk away, her command impossible to refuse. Before Millie could follow in the Duchess's impressive wake, Patricia once more grabbed her arm, pulling her close. The cloying scent of lilies invaded Millie's nostrils. She fought not to gag as Patricia hissed in her ear, "The Viscount is expecting to dance with you before the announcement of your engagement. You will not disappoint him." Millie took a measured step away from Patricia. "The Viscount should accustom himself to disappointment, madam, as should you." Her stepmother was sure to make Millie pay for this later, but the moment was too delicious not to enjoy. "Remember this, Millicent. The moment you sealed your fate." Millie smiled, though she worried her skin might crack from the effort. "I'm counting on it." She turned and walked away, her legs only shaking a little. Chapter 2. Major General Beaufort Drake, Earl of Tetley, scarred war hero, private investigator for the Prime Minister, fearsome warrior, loyal friend to few, and deadly foe to many, had suffered more than most men. Tortured at the hands of Afghanistan's cruelest warriors, his body bore the evidence of grievous wounds. A wicked scar carved him from forehead to chin in a diagonal slash of roped tissue, turning once rugged features into a gruesome mask. A beautifully fitted suit hid even more brutal evidence of the pain he'd endured. His soul was steeped in sin, and his heart had fossilized years ago. But Drake would gladly relive every nightmare that created him into a cruel, cold, deadly weapon if it granted him freedom from his current circumstances. Trussed up in his best suit, sipping watered-down ratafia, avoiding the curious and horrified gazes of the Beaumont's bluest of bloods, cursing the ache in his leg currently reaching a crescendo of pulsing agony, cooling his heels at the edge of the devil's most dastardly affair. A ball. He repressed a shudder. Give him fire-heated blades, rusty daggers, the rack. Anything but a soiree of England's most pampered, pompous lords and ladies. But the Prime Minister needed his best man for a mission, and Drake always answered the call, regardless of how treacherous the terrain. This glittering battlefield was diabolical in the extreme. If one more mercenary mamma thrust her clearly horrified daughter in his face, hoping for a match with the Earl of Tetley, he might be sick in the potted palms framing the ballroom. It was unthinkable how easily a matron could sell her child to the highest title or largest bank account in the room, even if the man behind the money and title was a heartless dragon, a monster his friend Killian often likened to Drake. Drake wouldn't wish himself upon any of these delicate virginal sacrifices, nor would he ever choose to suffer their company. He was not here to dance, or flirt, or seek out a wife. He was here to find a killer. Don't look now, but another young miss is heading this way, led by none other than the Duchess of Dorset. The man next to him whistled low. I may have been in France for the last 2 years, but even across the Channel, Lady Winterbourne's reputation is renowned. General Reynard Rehnquist once fought under Drake's leadership. His older brother, Major General William Rehnquist, Marquis of Stoneway, was a fellow commander in the Anglo-Afghan War. They had all been taken prisoner together, with their lead commander, Lieutenant General Robert Killian. Months of hideous torture nearly destroyed them, but it also forged friendships, extending beyond the bonds of brotherhood. Theirs was a kinship created in the fires of hell, amalgamating the 4 men like tempered steel. Drake had been working with Lieutenant General Killian on their current mission, tracking a murderous group of men operating a sex ring. In Killian's absence, Drake was glad for Reynard's return from France and his assistance on this mission. The unfortunate Lieutenant General Killian had fallen prey to a terrible tragedy. Marriage. To the infuriating Miss Hannah Simmons. Drake would never forgive Killian for succumbing to the deadliest of all ailments. Love. Horse shit. Love was a lie. Drake huffed out a disgusted sigh. He supposed for a man like Killian, chasing a beautiful woman across Europe on an extended honeymoon tour might be preferable to ferreting out a killer amongst England's most elite. The opposite was true for Drake. Not that he wished ill upon his friend, but Drake secretly hoped Killian ate some bad meat, or perhaps developed seasickness. Nothing lethal, just painful enough to ruin his disgustingly romantic holiday. After all, Killian had abandoned Drake to muddle through this mess of an assignment alone. All for the sake of a woman. He shuddered at the thought of willingly strapping on the shackles of matrimony. Though Prime Minister Russell was making veiled threats about Drake finally submitting to the inevitable, apparently Killian started quite the trend. A married lord was far less suspicious than a single one. The Prime Minister believed a wife would make it easier for Drake to continue his clandestine investigations into the gentry's worst crimes. Russell can bugger off. Drake drained his cup, forgetting for a moment what filled it. He winced at the disgustingly sweet drink. The naive ideal of love and marriage had tempted him once, and the resulting betrayal almost destroyed him. He would not willingly enter into a contract with any creature as mercurial as a woman. Instead, he would prove Prime Minister Russell's theory wrong by using speed and efficiency to capture his prey, not hiding behind the skirts of some duplicitous female. I dare any married blighter to be a more effective executor of the law. I'm glad you are here, Reynard. It's certainly nice to have someone with me I can trust since Killian stuck his neck in the parson's noose. Drake continued to scan the crowd, refusing to let his gaze linger on Miss Whittenburg, her bright hair a beacon in the crowded ballroom. Reynard chuckled. God save us from such a horrific fate, old friend? I may be 13 years your senior, Reynard, but I'm not in my dotage yet. Let's leave off the old. Though despite his 36 years, he felt ancient. Drake stretched his neck, sighing when the vertebrae popped. It was insufferably warm in the Whittenburg's ballroom, and the overpowering stench of pomade, perfume and sweat did not improve the atmosphere. But yes, I would happily saw off my own arm to avoid being trapped by any of these misses, especially that one. He nodded toward the statuesque Miss Whittenburg, gliding behind the Duchess of Dorset as proud as a goddess perched on the prow of a warship. While many would consider Miss Whittenburg too old, too tall, too bold in her colouring with such a riot of red hair piled high, red lips glistening, red cheeks glowing, Drake found her annoyingly captivating. A man could overfill his hands with breasts so generous. Where the devil did that thought come from? His cock strained against his breeches in an eloquent response. Absolutely not. Drake crushed the attraction stirring his long-dead libido with an iron will. He hadn't felt such interest in a woman since Nora, though Miss Millicent Whittenburg couldn't be more different from his ex-fiancée. Where Miss Millicent was luscious curves and powerful limbs, Nora's waif-like figure and angelic colouring made her a true English rose, complete with sharp and deadly thorns. No part of him wished to think about his first, and only, love, or how that disaster ended. Still, he learned well the lesson Nora taught him about the dangers of being vulnerable. The last thing he needed was to become entangled with a woman destined to destroy his carefully constructed calm. The red-headed Valkyrie making a beeline toward him was just such a creature. Drake would do well to turn and run, but he ran from nothing. Clad in cream silk, nearly matching the tone of her skin, it was all too easy to picture her without the dress. His cock heartily agreed with his imaginings. Dear God, I am not some cad led around by my prick. If Miss Millicent knew his thoughts, she would run screaming in the opposite direction. The woman distracted him when nothing ever destroyed his focus. Instead of scanning the crowd for a killer, Drake contemplated the exact texture of her lips. Would they be soft or firm? Sweet or tart? And for that alone, he should keep his distance. He couldn't afford to lose sight of this mission. As if to further prove his point, his inner calm evaporated, along with any hope of control, as the women approached. Miss Millicent Whittenburg was wild and unpredictable. Everything he despised in the fairer sex. Everything that made him ache in places long forgotten. Ah, Major General Drake, I distinctly remember you abhorring social events. What possibly induced you to attend this soirée? Lady Philippa raised an eyebrow in an expression designed to quell a lesser man. He resisted the urge to step backward in retreat. Your Grace, always an honour. Bowing his head at the Duchess, he noticed Miss Millicent's skirt had caught, revealing an inch of surprisingly slim ankle. Heat suffused his neck, and he clenched his jaw before she shifted, and the buttery silk fell smoothly back into place. And who is your new friend? Lady Philippa thrust her chin toward Reynard. Allow me to introduce General Reynard Rehnquist. We fought together in the war. Drake stepped back so Reynard could bow. Ah, well. Lady Winterbourne thwacked a jewel-encrusted fan against her hand. Rehnquist? I know your brother, though we haven't seen much of him since he returned from the war. An honour, Your Grace. Yes, William prefers his own company these days. Reynard's mouth twitched before he turned his mischievous dark gaze on Miss Millicent. I don't believe I've had the pleasure, miss. Women fell to Reynard's charm like autumn leaves in a brisk wind. He was everything Drake would never be. He looked like a naughty cherub who'd turned into a man, complete with golden, curly locks. Reynard even had dimples, which women were known to swoon over. After years of watching the dashing reprobate use his gilded tongue to talk women out of their lacy underthings, Drake more than expected it. He welcomed Reynard's skills. It took all the attention away from Drake. No lady would choose a scarred old man over a dashing young rake. But for some reason, the idea of Millicent Whittenburg blushing in flustered appreciation at Reynard's practiced flirtations filled Drake with a black rage. He recognized this feeling. He experienced the same rush of impotent anger when he returned from the war to see Nora on the arm of his brother. her ring finger glinting with a diamond wedding band. Jealousy. But it made no sense for him to suffer the emotion now. Certainly not for the bold redhead.
Miss Millicent Whittenburg, sir.
Millicent didn't blush. She didn't bat her eyelashes or raise her fan to hide a coquettish smile. Instead, she narrowed her coffee-brown gaze. Sharp intelligence flashed in her eyes.
How odd. This ball is being held in my honour, but I don't remember seeing either of your names on the guest list.
Most peculiar, as we both received invitations. Drake straightened his shoulders and leaned into the lie. The Marquis Henry Whittenburg and his Marchioness may not have summoned them, but Prime Minister Russell made sure Reynard and Drake were equipped with expertly forged invitations. Besides, no one paid attention to the guest list at a ball this crowded. Except for Miss Millicent Whittenburg. Maddening woman. Facing a lady so close to him in height disconcerted Drake. At 6'3", he towered over most people. But Miss Millicent almost reached his chin and held his gaze with the fortitude of a commander. Did she inwardly recoil at the devastation of his scars? This close, in the blazing light of 1,000 candles from the chandelier above, she would see the gruesome stretch of roped tissue as it pulled against healthy skin. The white scar cut across his brow, bisecting his left eyebrow, slashing across the bridge of his nose, and slicing through his right cheek to end at his jaw. There were no surgeons in the Afghanistan prison, but a young bootmaker turned soldier had done his best in the dank cell they shared. Drake knew his visage was grotesque, but Millicent's eyes, darker than cocoa beans and just as rich, didn't stray from his own icy glare. Just as she opened her indecently plump lips to no doubt deliver a blistering retort, the orchestra swelled to a crescendo, signalling the end of the set. I believe they are readying for the next dance. Lady Philippa drew his gaze away from Miss Whittenburg. Dear God, surely the Duchess doesn't expect me to dance with her. Drake cleared his throat, unsure of how to respond. He hadn't seen Lady Winterbourne since Everleigh Manor. Her ward was the same Hannah Simmons who married his friend right after the courageous young woman saved Lieutenant General Robert Killian from a killer. Perhaps Killian wasn't quite as foolish in marrying the girl as Drake thought. Hardly. Even courageous women are dangerous, more so sometimes. Thank you, Your Grace, though I am certainly no fit partner for someone as dignified as yourself. His rusty social skills were on full display. The Duchess snorted. I know. I have no interest in dancing with you, but you should suffice for Miss Whittenburg. I beg your pardon. Dance, Major General Drake, with Miss Whittenburg, now. Lady Philippa blinked at him, and the effect was similar to a firing squad sending its first volley into the fray. If the Queen's military were run by the Duchess of Dorset, we would rule the world in under a sennight. He couldn't refuse such a blatant command. It would be an unpardonable offence to the Duchess and a grave insult to Miss Whittenburg. Bloody fucking hell. Just the idea of holding Miss Millicent within the circle of his arms, her soft curves pressed against his hard planes, her dark eyes melting like hot chocolate over flames, her scent, an intriguing blend of citrus and crisp cotton, infiltrating his senses was enough to make him forget his whole reason for attending this blasted ball. Laundry and lemons shouldn't cause a wave of lust to wash through him like lava, but it did. Not a good sign. Miss Millicent's reaction to Lady Winterbourne's command was even more confounding. The beautiful disaster of a woman swallowed hard and tucked her hands behind her back. His suspicious nature sparked to life. She was usually bold and brazen. He watched her ride a horse with the skill of a seasoned infantry soldier, trade insults while wielding her wit like a sword, and defend her friends with reckless courage both inspiring and intriguing. She was a harridan of the highest order, but her audacity also impressed him. Yet, standing close enough for him to see the dusting of freckles across her nose, it was clear Miss Millicent was flummoxed. Her expressive skin flushed as she ducked her head in a rare display of nerves or embarrassment. The woman was less inclined to dance with him than he was to ask for the privilege. How interesting. I wonder how often she is asked to dance.
This is a mistake,
she murmured. He almost missed her words in the cacophony of conversations surrounding them. But Millicent's husky voice was like a siren's song, calling to him. She expected him to refuse the Duchess's command. So he did the opposite. Miss Millicent, would you do me the honour? Drake extended his gloved hand. Millie wanted to grasp for air as she drowned in regret. The plan seemed so brilliant when the Duchess first discussed it with her weeks ago. An excellent way to avoid Viscount Treadful, spurn her stepmother, and gain the one thing she wanted most: freedom. Lady Philippa made it seem so simple. Seduce the one man who would never offer for her. Major General Drake fit the bill perfectly. He was many things: cold, deadly, unfeeling, and, most importantly, he despised the fairer sex. Millie had sat in Philippa's sitting room, sipping whiskey-laced tea, her attention completely focused on the Duchess, as Philippa recounted the vicious gossip surrounding Major General Drake and his fiancée, Miss Eleanora Fitzwilliam. One of the Beaumonts' jammiest bits of jam, desperately in love with the dashing Earl of Tetley, until Elnora abandoned Major General Drake with news of his capture in the Afghan desert reached England. Believing him as good as dead, Elnora married his younger brother. Quite the scandal. When Major General Drake returned from the Anglo-Afghan War, scarred, damaged, hardened by the atrocities he'd endured but still very much alive, it was to the news his fiancée was married to his brother. Major General Drake never attempted to court another lady. All signs pointed to the man remaining single forever. Incredibly tragic for Major General Drake, but perfect for their plan. His hatred of women would eclipse his honour once Millie tricked him into ruining her, or, more accurately, ruining her. But this time, there was an important difference. This time, her ruination would be public. Count Treadful would be forced to rescind his offer of marriage. Drake would never ask for her hand, or any other part of her for that matter. Millie's father and stepmother would be more than happy to hand her over to Lady Philippa Winterbourne, and the Duchess would secret her away in the country, where her sinful nature could do no more harm. Except Millie wouldn't be languishing away picking roses and dodging bumblebees. There was a diabolical ring of men kidnapping country girls and forcing them into the flesh trade. Lady Philippa needed someone to pose as a maid, bait for the secret society of lords orchestrating this sex trafficking ring. Millie was going to be that bait, not something she could accomplish as the dutiful wife of Lord Tread. Major General Drake was her way out. All she had to sacrifice was something she'd already destroyed years ago: her virtue. Simple as a Sunday tea party. Just seduce the Earl of Tetley. A man who thus far had shown nothing but an acute dislike of Millie. He doesn't have to like me to ruin me. St. George certainly didn't care a whit about me, but that didn't stop him from throwing up my skirts. But that is where she and Philippa misstepped. While the idea of seducing Major General Drake seemed easy to achieve, the reality was quite different. Looking into Major General Drake's glacial gaze created a most unwelcome heat in embarrassing places. The back of her neck, the hollow of her knee, the apex of her thighs. Her whole body was inflamed, her skin stretching too tightly. She was unaccountably sensitive to the brush of satin against her legs. Bloody hell, Millie was no innocent. but she had never reacted so strongly to a man as she did to the Major General's frigid stare. Highly annoying and very inappropriate. She certainly never felt such ardent heat with her one-time lover Franklin St. George, and at the time, his gaze had held nothing but impassioned affection, not the cold disdain sharpening Major General Drake's glacial glare. What if Patricia is right? What if I'm a wanton? This was nothing like the mild tingles she'd felt with Franklin. He had been her childhood obsession. Their country estates abutted one another, and they grew up playing together on the grounds of their neighbouring properties. Millie's ability to run faster, punch harder, ride better, and shoot more accurately than St. George created some friction, but generally they got along famously. Both families assumed Millie and Franklin would marry one day, joining the two ancient titles in property and bloodlines. It wasn't surprising when Franklin St. George asked to court Millie during her first season out. It was surprising how easily she succumbed to seduction. Some might say Millie leapt forward when others would have hastened a retreat. While she never thought herself a lustful woman, Franklin's clumsy attempts at kissing quickly evolved into much more. Millie found she ached for an elusive something shimmering on the horizon as his hands became bolder and her skirts were shoved around her ears in a frenzy during one sunny afternoon picnic. Unfortunately, the entire event was rather disappointing for Millie, and far messier than she guessed. In a sticky, painful, frantic moment, her virtue was gone, and soon after that, so was her betrothal to Franklin St. George. Foolish Millie, believing the pretty lies St. George fed her during their doomed romance. After their disappointing picnic, Franklin met with her father and confessed their crimes, though she was the only one thought to be guilty. In the meeting, he insinuated Millie's virginal state to be in question prior to their dalliance. While he had been swept away by affection for Millie and succumbed to her seductive skills, once certain truths came to light, namely her lack of virtue, St. George no longer wished to pursue a spoiled maid. Which was ridiculous. Given the fact he spoiled her, and his only argument proving she wasn't a virgin involved compromising her himself as evidence of her wanton nature. Men are such illogical creatures. It was embarrassingly obvious Millie's virtue had been intact prior to their fateful picnic. However, no one asked her to confirm or refute St. George's accusations. Her guilt was established the moment St. George spread her thighs. Her father's heart was broken by his sinful daughter, and Millie's shame was complete. St. George agreed to quietly end the betrothal and never reveal her sexual immorality in exchange for a tidy sum bestowed upon him by Millie's father, which was Franklin's purpose from the beginning. Mortifying to know his sole interest in Millie centred on the money he gained by not marrying her, especially considering the tendre she had long carried for the bastard. She pulled herself back to the present. No more of that nonsense. It was insufferable. A man could swive about London, carousing with prostitutes, mistresses, and merry widows to his heart's content. Reformed rakes were in high demand on the husband market, but women received no such chances for redemption. A lady caught with her skirts above her knees was immediately and irrevocably invalid. The unfairness of it lit a fire in Millie. So she would use this inequity to bring her carefully laid plan to fruition. Major General Drake would compromise her tonight, even if Millie had to force the man with brute strength. But this time, her ruination wouldn't be swept under the rug like unwanted dirt. The entire beau monde would be privy to Millie's indiscretion, and her chances of ever marrying would be destroyed. Thank God. Millie took a deep breath and threw back her shoulders. Even though it felt manipulative and wrong, even though an oily coating of shame made her stomach twist uncomfortably, she had committed to this course. There were no other options. Major General Drake could bugger off if he didn't like it. She didn't much like it either, but it was her only hope for freedom. and besides, her reputation would suffer far more greatly than his. She reached out to grasp the Major General's gloved hand, and in lieu of a smile, ducked her head in an abbreviated curtsy. In a few moments, my entire life will be changed. Major General Drake had very shiny boots. Millie wanted to scuff them. Instead, she let him tuck her hand in the crook of his arm and lead her smoothly to the dance floor. A hint of leather and spice tickled her nose. Cloves, if she wasn't mistaken. The man smelled of saddles and sweet buns. I do love sweet buns, and saddles for that matter. Still, the combination shouldn't cause her tummy to erupt into a million bubbles. Millie's mouth watered as her nipples constricted. Odd, considering the ballroom was insufferably warm. And why couldn't she breathe? Franklin St. George had certainly never caused her lungs to seize. A murmur rippled throughout the assembly as 100 gazes burned into her back. Fresh fodder for the gossips tonight. You haven't seen anything yet, ladies. Prepare yourselves for a truly scandalous evening. If she was going to be painted as a wicked wanton, she might as well enjoy herself. Not only had she avoided dancing with her intended for the expected display of affection required at such events, but she had also managed to convince one of the most reclusive and intimidating bachelors of the season to squire her onto the dance floor. Nothing to it, ladies. Just employ the Duchess of Dorset as matchmaker, and almost any ungainly spinster can bag an earl. She should stitch the instructions onto handkerchiefs and hand them out at balls. Millie almost smiled, but then she remembered the task at hand. This was serious business. It wasn't fair, it wasn't kind, but she was tired of being kind and fair at the expense of her own happiness. She wished the circumstances were different, but wishes were as useless as tea in a typhoon. No one would save Millie from her fate except Millie herself, with some assistance from the Duchess, of course. The Major General swept her onto the floor, his right palm pressed against her left, his left hand resting on the generous swell of her hip. She had noticed Major General Drake walked with a slight limp, but it didn't hinder his graceful movements on the chalked floor. She lifted her right hand and placed it on his shoulder. A shoulder made of granite. Good heavens. The man must have replaced his musculature with something impenetrable and unyielding. Millie fleetingly wondered how one achieved such a medical miracle. But then the violins began to sing. The cello resonated through the crowd, and like the wind in the rowan trees or the seas swelling on the sand, they began to move. Never before did her feet float above the floor. Never did she feel delicate and fragile in a man's arms. Never had her heart beat so loudly. She feared the whole assembly might hear it. Perhaps it was because the Major General was so tall, and powerful, and terrifying, and desirable. Poppycock. Millie didn't desire Major General Drake. Ridiculous notion. From her first meeting with him 4 months prior, at Lord Geoffrey Bradford's dinner party, he had continually been rude and dismissive toward her. If she was bold enough to bring her scheme to fruition, his disdain would only intensify. But what choice do I have? Pernicious Patricia and her ridiculous plans. No. She couldn't blame her stepmother for what she was going to do to Major General Drake. This decision was hers, and she must shoulder the consequences alone. Besides, adding rake to his reputation will only increase Major General Drake's appeal with young ladies who like dangerous, mysterious men with dashing scars, which I do not. She viciously reminded herself. But honestly, did he have to look like some romanticized Viking warrior with the most startling blue eyes she'd ever seen? So light. They reminded Millie of a description she'd read about icebergs, written by the courageous Captain John Biscoe in the Journal of the Royal Geographical Society of London. It was incredibly unfair. No wonder Lord Drake's gaze could freeze her like a blast of Arctic chill. Chips of frigid water trapped in a face both fearsome and striking, though his gaze didn't seem cold tonight. Can glaciers smoulder? If only Millie's conundrum could be solved with a solid round of sparring instead of a waltz. She was getting quite good at physical combat. Philippa said her height and general athletic prowess made her a dangerous pugilist. It would be so much easier to grapple with Major General Drake than glide across the dance floor in his strong arms. But not nearly as pleasant. Millie's thoughts were becoming muddled, an unfortunate habit she developed around Major General Drake. I should offer you my felicitations on your upcoming wedding. The Major General's gravelled voice created vibrations along her spine, spiralling over nerve endings, zinging through her veins like a primal pulse. Mingling with his leather and clove scent was something dark and smoky. Perhaps it was the cheroots she'd seen him smoking. She wanted to lean closer and inhale him. Do you ever tire of doing things you should instead of what you want? Millie pressed her lips together. Where had that come from? She risked glancing up. He pulled her infinitesimally closer. Yes. One syllable, and her core turned liquid. Candlelight glinted on the blonde stubble covering his chin. His shadow beard matched the shade of his hair. What little hair he had. He kept it shorn so close to his head he almost seemed bald. A shocking fashion choice, but who was she to judge? He had a remarkably symmetrical head. What would it feel like to rub her hand over the bristled edges of his hair? She shivered. Are you cold, Miss Millicent? He leaned close, his words tickling her ear. Actually, I find myself overly warm. Perhaps we could step onto the veranda for a bit of air. She held her breath. This was the moment. If he refused or escorted her back